So, Trent, what have you been eating?
After work, me and my coworker got Greek food. We had baklava and falafel gyros, and apparently Greek French fries, which are just French fries with like cheese on them. But that doesn't sound particularly Greek. That just sounds like a universal delicacy. So false advertising there, but no
It
complaints.
doesn't seem really ethnically accurate, but it does
No,
sound good.
I wasn't in a position to ask questions. I was neck deep in French fries and cheese, so I was occupied. What about you?
As I believe I said on a previous podcast, I've been having lots of pizza as my father has a
Oh,
new
pizza
pizza
oven, pizza
oven.
oven, pizza oven.
Exactly. So he made garlic bread too today.
Does he love his new pizza oven? I could see your father being enthusiastic about that sort of thing.
He absolutely loves it. It is he likes it more than either of his children. He doesn't speak to us anymore.
Well, yeah, he's got his priorities straight. Can it only be used for pizza? How hot does it get?
No, I mean it's an oven, so you can make bread in
Is it
it.
indoors or outdoors?
We have it outdoors.
Could it be seasonally relocated?
Yes, but like I
If
think we're
push
gonna
came
keep
to
it in the
shove,
same spot. Yeah, I mean you could move it,
just
but
for
like
continuity.
yeah, and yeah, but it can get up to. I don't know what it can get up to, but we have it at like 900 degrees, so it cooks stuff
What
really
powers
quickly.
it? Is it wood burning?
It can be a few things. You can do it on like a
What does
normal
your
like
father
gas tank.
prefer?
Well, we've been at first we did it with a gas tank, and then now we use charcoal or like not charcoal, like just
Ooh,
coal.
yeah.
And you can also use like wood burning, so you can use a few different methods, but
It's good
we
that you're
use
using that
coal.
fossil fuel. No, CO2 is great for the atmosphere.
We like to support our local coal miners.
Yeah, touchy subject, Parth.
Anyways, Trent, you told me you had some funny story to tell me on our private lines
Yeah,
of communication.
something weird happened at work yesterday, and I wanted to tell Parth, but I thought it'd be better to do it live on the airwaves, so his response would be genuine, and we wouldn't have to recreate it for this exact moment. So, Parth, let me set the scene.
Please.
I'm at work, and have you seen The Shining, the movie?
I have not.
Oh, well, awkward. Well,
But I know like most things, like I know everything about it other than having watched it.
this is gonna take away a little. So, okay, are you aware of the scene where there's a naked lady? Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Okay, so there's this, for the viewers at home, there's this naked lady. Jack Nicholson walks into room 237, and there she is sitting in the bathtub. And he gets infatuated with her, and they go and they kiss, and then she turns into a monster, and then he gets scared and he runs away. But in the meantime, she's like sitting in the bathtub, fully nude as one does, and then stands up and like breasts and genitals and all, and so it looks kind of like a porno. I mean, just from an objective standpoint, like it's a nude person. And so I'm at work and it's on the TV. And since I was just flipping through the channels and stumbled upon it, it was on cable. I figured it would be like edited for content. Um, but for whatever reason, it it was fully explicit, which didn't make sense to me because that shouldn't be accessible to the general public. But so I'm sitting there expecting it to be blurred out, and so it just me and my boss, in the middle of the night, amidst I don't know, business hours, and so then this family walks by, and they're clearly like uptight, and they have like 7 kids, so probably religious because they don't believe in contraceptions, and so they walk by and see what's on the television, and they clearly don't recognize that it's like a cinematic experience, and they just think these two dudes are like watching porn like together as a group. And so he like presses up against, he puts his 7 kids away, and he like comes up to the glass, and he starts like motioning at us because he's like upset that we're watching porn in public. And then we were like trying to communicate with him that it wasn't porn, and that it was just like, a Stanley Kubrick like movie, and we agreed to disagree, and then he left because he thought that we were like creeps. Was that worth your while? I mean, the miscommunication was kind of funny.
There was a lot of build-up, but it was a worthwhile payoff.
I'd hate to disappoint you.
No. Of course, Trent. There is nothing in the world you could do to ever disappoint me.
It was related to movies, so it's topical to the podcast, and, it was a recent event. It happened just yesterday, and I thought you'd like to hear about my current events. You like to stay updated on my whereabouts and, all that. So, let's... The show now? It's time.
Yes, shall we cue the intro? Welcome back to Craft Services, where we talk about movies. Each week we discuss a different film and hopefully have an interview with a crew member of that film to talk with us about their experience. This week we're going to be talking with Birds of Prey, or The Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. And with us we have one of its editors, Evan Schiff.
You talked so fast.
Mm-hmm.
That was impressive.
Thank you. Trent, do you want to give us what the synopsis of this movie is?
After splitting with the Joker, Harley Quinn joins superheroes Black Canary Huntress and Renee Montoya to save a young girl from an evil crime lord. I think it's weird that they describe them as superheroes. If anything, aren't they like anti-heroes? Or...
Yeah, I would say they're more anti-hero. They're not really super anti-heroes either. They're just kind of, I guess other than Black Canary, who for the most part doesn't use superpowers.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I understand there's exceptions, such as Batman being a superhero, not possessing powers, but it seems like to use that as a blanket term and then for none of them to really qualify, all of them are kind of just normal people.
Trent, are we saying we're anti-women in superhero films?
No comment. But in the Batman universe especially, don't none of the supervillains really have superpowers?
That's not really true. There's Killer Croc.
Or Poison Ivy.
Poison Ivy.
I guess there's some
Mr.
that are more
Freeze.
Supernatural. I feel like I hear a scientific argument for the existence of Mr. Freeze, but no one's saying that the Riddler or Two-Face or Joker or Penguin have any sort of
that's
powers.
fair. I would say the main Two-Face, Joker,
Scarecrow's
Riddler,
a good example.
Scarecrow are all kind of reality based. That's fair.
All right. Well, we had an interview, did we not, with a one Evan Schiff? See what I did there?
Oh wow, that was a really good segue, Trent. I think we should leave them to you next time, in the future.
Yeah, we best. Okay, so tell us about this interview. Wasn't it swell?
It was fantabulous, if you will. Excuse the pun.
Wordplay.
Thank you. Evan Schiff was a wonderful guest.
He talks and mentor
with us about many films. He's had a long, distinct filmography, and as you'll hear, so enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our interview with Evan Schiff. He's the genius editor who's worked on such films as Star Trek Into Darkness, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, John Wick, Chapters 2 and 3, and our topic for today, Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey, or Birds of Prey, The Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, whichever the title of the movie is. But thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we generally like to ask our guests, what got you interested in film?
I originally wanted to do special effects. I have some family members that work at Stan Winston Studio and have worked at Stan Winston Studio for decades now, and including Legacy Effects, which is what Stan Winston Studio became after he died. So anyway, when I came out to visit family, because I'm originally from Syracuse, but I have a bunch of family here in LA. So when I would come out to visit them, I got a tour of Stan Winston Studio, and that was sort of the first inkling that I had that you could work in movies as a career. that it was like these movies didn't just appear, people made them, and there were jobs that were associated with that. And so that piqued my interest. And from there it was like, okay, well, what's a good path to try to follow, and not really knowing anything about it. I started researching the USC film program, and that's where I got in, and then you know my career started from there.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask what your time at USC Film School was like, because notoriously, like, Steven Spielberg went there, and it's one of the best film programs in the country. So I'm sure that was strenuous and also a very positive experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if strenuous. It's fun. It's like if you like making movies and you like spending the hours that it takes, it's not it's not hard. There are aspects of it that that are emotionally challenging. Like there's a class. If you are a production major at USC, there are 3 main film production classes that you are required to take, sort of beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And the beginner one, they don't really tell you this, but if you talk to people who have gone through the program before, I think everybody's pretty much in agreement that the beginner one, the point of it is not to make good short films. The point of it is to build up your wall, because you go into this classroom with you do like one short film every 3 weeks, and you come in and you show it to the rest of the class, and the rest of the class in their critique is brutal. So you by the end of that class, you walk out of there, I feel like, at least going like, okay, that was rough, my films are terrible, everybody hated them, and they told me that to my face, but now I can take criticism. And I think that becomes really important later on in your career. It's a skill that I know I needed to work on when I was first starting to edit, and having people critique my actual like professional edits. But getting that beginner experience at USC of like having people just absolutely tear you to shreds, that was strenuous and useful. But the rest of it is like, you're hanging out with your friends, you're making movies, you're in LA, so you've got all of that around you, and some of the opportunities that provides to like meet professional filmmakers. So it's fun. I had a great time at SC, and I still keep in touch with a lot of people that I went to film school with.
This goes back a little bit further, but did you learn to edit on film, or have you only ever like worked digitally?
I have only ever worked on film at USC. I did a little bit of tape-to-tape editing when I was in high school. And then when I got to SC, there was sort of a mixture. Like the beginner class I was talking about was all digital, which was fairly recently at that time, converted into a digital class. I was at USC from 2000 to 2004. Then the intermediate class was all film, and we were the last semester to do both our picture and our sound on film. So we had 16 millimeter black and white that we were cutting on a flatbed, and we had we had, if we wanted sound, we had to transfer it to mag tape and then cut that on the flatbed also. And then the semester after us of that class switched to Pro Tools for their sound. So then they started doing a sort of a hybrid model. And then the advanced class, we went through more of a professional like telecine process. We cut in Avid, and then we had to conform our work print to the to what we to the cut list that we generated in Avid, and then screen the actual film print. So that was also like a little bit of a trial when you go to the screening and everybody's putting their films up on their projectors, which are not forgiving, and in the middle of your film, you have a bad splice and the film rips apart. I guess there was nothing that I did at SC that was entirely like digital from start to finish, except for that beginning class. And as I mentioned, that beginning class is not really meant to, you're not really meant to like make films that you're going to send anybody else.
That's interesting. We've only ever worked on Adobe Premiere, so we don't have the experience you do. But just speaking on editing, most people that go to film school end up wanting to write and direct, and you obviously went into editing. and you spoke about how you first wanted to go into special effects. And we were wondering what your time at the Stan Winston studio was like and how you went from that to editing.
Yeah, so I think actually one of the things that helped me get into USC Film School was telling them in my interview that I didn't want to direct. Because obviously they get a lot of people that show up and they're like, "What do you want to do?" And they're like, "I want to direct." And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But the film school, I think, was interested and probably still is in acquiring a diverse group of students who want different things. Um, so I mean, I don't know. They don't tell you why you got in, but for me, I feel like telling them that I didn't want to direct, might have been a check in the corner of let's let him into the school. Um, so my journey at Stan Winston's was through the family members I mentioned. I got an internship between my junior and senior year of high school, and they put me in the electronics department under a guy named Glenn Derry, who is just a genius. And I learned a lot from him that summer, things that were way, way above and beyond, my level of education at the time. But I also, because I'm a fairly techie guy, I also um, spent the summer making them a like a parts inventorying system in Microsoft Access, and Stan ended up seeing that during one of the company all hands, and then like on the spot offered me a job, which I deferred a year until I was coming out to LA to go to college. So by the time that I graduated high school, a year after that, I 10 days after I graduated, I moved out to LA and started my job at Stan Winston's, which I had for 5 years. From then on, it was sort of my college job for all 4 years, and then I went full time for 1 year afterwards.
To be clear, this is Stan Winston of Stan Winston Studios that offered you the job.
Yes. Stan's great. Stan was was an amazing, very charismatic and very smart guy. And I enjoyed every day going into work. You have to sort of pinch yourself, be like, this is where I work, and these are the people that I'm working with. It was great. And then 2 years in my sophomore year at SC, Stan was interested in starting a visual effects division inside the studio. And they had an Avid that was in a room that barely anybody went in. They didn't know how to use it. The Avids were super expensive at the time, like $30,000 or something like that. And so when they started, they would use them to make demo reels and things like that, but they didn't really have anybody full time who would do that. And when they started the visual effects division, they realized that they needed somebody who was there all the time to run the Avid for cutting in shots that the digital division was making, in order to make sure that they lined up with the edit of the movie that they were working on. And so I volunteered for that because I had a little bit of experience in Avid and nobody else in the studio did. And they were like, sure. It wasn't a full-time. My primary responsibilities at Stan Winston were tech support and network administration. And they're basically like, as long as you can add those responsibilities to your workload, we're cool with that. And that was generally how they worked. Like if I finished my day and I wanted to go see what the people in hair and makeup were doing, there was no pushback against visiting other departments and having them show you what they were doing. So anyway, so yeah, I became the network administrator / visual effects editor around my sophomore year of college, and then that was around the same time as that beginner class at SC, where because you're making one short film every 3 weeks, and you have to write it and direct it and shoot it and find actor. You're doing everything yourself, and that coincided with me figuring out that I really actually liked cutting my short films much more than I liked doing a lot of the other parts of the process. And so when I was taking that class, that's when I was like, I think I'm going to focus on editing, and this opportunity at Stan Winston just sort of appeared magically, and then I pursued editing from then on. So by the time that I graduated from college, and within a year, my last year of work at Stan Winston helped me get into the Editors Guild, And then from there on, I was able to go look for production side jobs, like in the actual editorial department as opposed to in the visual effects department.
So this is a little bit of a pivot, but just talking about our main topic for the day. How did you get involved with Birds of Prey?
Birds of Prey came about because there were some reshoots that they were doing um, regarding the action scenes, which is pretty typical. And a lot of my director from John Wick was involved, sort of consulting and helping design the sequence. In his company, 8711, had done the original action shoots during principal photography. And so he asked Warner Brothers if they could bring me on for those reshoots, and then so that I could take a look and I could cut those action scenes. And then I hit it off with Warner Brothers pretty well, and they asked me to stay on until the end of the film.
So is that something that's sort of common within the industry of having another editor come on for reshoots? That, I mean, obviously reshoots happen with big budget movies, but like, do editors sort of come and go?
Editors come and go. Yeah, it's normal for editors to come and go for a variety of reasons. If like on John Wick 3, I had two co-editors that were on at different times, because it just the workload got so intense and the schedule was short. And I, especially as I get older and I have kids and things like that, I am becoming more aware of trying to keep my work-life balance. And for me, at least, bringing on another editor to help out is not a sign of weakness or a sign that there's something wrong, but is actually a savior for my general, personal life. And I don't get precious about, about who cut what. So yeah, I mean, editors come on and they leave for different reasons, all the time on all sorts of types of movies. So this was not unusual in any way.
So as like the lead editor, like could you do it all yourself if you really wanted to? And it's just like getting assistant editors like for your own like sanity and well-being in this case. But like if you were dead set on it, you could edit a movie start to finish as far as the studio is concerned.
I mean, it's always a negotiation. If the studio feels like you need help, they might hire another editor because to sort of save you from yourself. The majority of the movies that I've cut, I've done on my own. John Wick 2, I did on my own. John Wick 3, I had help. Birds of Prey, I had help. And I was help on Birds of Prey. It's I feel like if you are insisting on cutting it yourself, even when the workload is just drowning you in footage, or you just clearly don't have enough time, then you're not doing yourself or the film any favors. So you could try to resist bringing help on, but you probably wouldn't be very successful at it. It tends to be that once the idea of bringing on another editor has been brought up, people don't tend to let it go, because if it's being brought up in the first place, then there's generally a reason for it.
Well, just backtracking just a little bit, since you were brought on to Birds of Prey through your connection with Chad Stahelski, how did you end up getting involved with John Wick Chapter 2 and 3, and what was that experience like?
So that I'm repped at the United Talent Agency, and I was working on this small indie romance about Barack and Michelle Obama's first date called Southside with You. And my agent called and was like, "Hey, there's an opening on John Wick 2. Do you want us to put you up for it?" And I was like, "Sure. Who does anybody say no to that?" um, and which is like for me, I that was John Wick 2 was my first studio, like big studio movie that I cut. So it was a little bit of a leap of faith for my agents to sell me to Chad and to the producers. And I'm grateful to everybody involved. Chad will tell you that he always likes to look for what he calls the person behind the person. So like, instead of getting the absolute A-list, production designer, who's the person who's actually like that, the like right-hand man of that person, and like So and I think that comes from spending much of his career as a second unit director and a stunt coordinator. Somebody had to give him a break to shoot John Wick 1 or to direct John Wick 1. So, he recognizes that like there are plenty of talented people out there and they just need the opportunity to prove that. So UTA sent my resume and name to Chad and the producers of John Wick 2 and Lionsgate. I had a phone interview with Chad on the first day of production, and then by the time that I heard that I'd gotten the job, they had already shot for like 10 or 11 days. And so by the time I actually got into an edit room in New York, because I had to fly there with my family and my at that time like 3-month-old daughter, had already shot for 2 weeks, which is not a great position to be in when you're like a new editor in a new situation with a new director and new producers, and you're coming in through no fault of your own 2 weeks behind. I felt a lot of pressure to perform, and thankfully it all worked out. And they sort of left me alone during production to just catch up on dailies. Nobody really came in and asked to see very much, but there was, within the first week or so, there was a second unit car shoot that the second unit director came in to work with me on, and I learned after the fact that was their probation period, where they grilled the second unit director after he had worked with me to see what he thought, and if that had not gone well, they might have switched me out for somebody else.
So just a small question. You worked on the Obama thing. Is it true that they saw Do the Right Thing on their first date? I read that somewhere.
I think it is true. It's been a few years now. I forget the details of what was true and what wasn't. I know that Rich, the director, he did a lot of research to what their first date was, and the types of things that they did, and sort of invented what they might have talked about. So there's like a lot of things that are influenced by interviews that they gave. But I think Do the Right Thing and I think that was an actual event that happened, if I remember right.
I just wanted to fact check that, but more importantly,
I'm not entirely sure, but I believe so.
So what is the editor's relationship with the director typically? And what was it like on Birds of Prey in particular?
The editor's relationship with the director it's a very personal one. You are working in a room with your director for 12 hours a day, sometimes every day, sometimes 6 or 7 days per week. Everybody forms their own relationship. So I've worked with a bunch of different directors. I have different types of relationships with all of them. You know, I think above all, you need to be open and honest, because editorial needs to be the place where you can filter out all of the like politics and the drama and the things that are happening outside, of your office, and just focus on what is the best for the movie in this particular moment. And in order to have those conversations, you have to not hold back. Like I don't. If I think that we've made a mistake, or there is something that's hurting the film, I will bring that up, quite candidly. But then the tricky part becomes, you have to be aware of, when you've pushed your opinion up to the ledge, so to speak, because at the end of the day, it's not my job to override the director. It's my job to help them make the best film that possible, and to help them achieve their vision. So oftentimes, if I'm arguing for something and I get overruled, I might bring it up a couple more times if an opportunity presents itself. But at the end of the day, if I say, I think we should do this, and the director says, no, we're going to do that, then you're like, okay, let me make the best version of that I can. Coming on to Birds of Prey, partway through post, I ended up, the way I'll backtrack a little bit. The way that these big movies work is that the director has a 10-week period after shooting ends, where they are allowed to make the movie, their version of the movie, essentially. So when you hear director's cut, that's what that means. It's the state that the movie is in at the end of those 10 weeks. And within those 10 weeks, um, you're pretty much left alone. Sometimes you can, there are exceptions to that, but for the most part, those 10 weeks are sort of sacred, and it's time for the director and the editor to cut. So I came on after that, which means that by the time that I came on, the studio had already seen and weighed in on the movie, and was involved. The producers were involved. And so, um, that situation was a little bit different from normal, just because at that point when I'm going in a room to cut, I'm actually going in a room to cut with a lot of people. It's not just the director; it's everybody that I just mentioned, and everybody is seeing those cuts, and everybody is weighing in on them, and you get 10 sets of notes instead of one set of notes. And any major decision goes all the way up the decision tree until it's either mutually agreed upon by everybody, or decided, and or somebody decides who can't be overruled. Um, so so that one was a little bit different in terms of workflow, but I think it worked out in the end.
So when you're editing with a room full of people, is it just like you at the computer, like operating, and everyone else seated behind you, they like yelling criticism or praise, or telling you when to stop or when to cut?
Thankfully, in this layout, they're actually seated in front of me. I had my desk, and then in front of the Avid was the couch, and in front of that was the TV that we were all looking at, which I actually like, because then nobody's really looking over my shoulder. But it's a lot of it is discussion. So you're like, I wonder what would happen if we moved this scene there. And if it's a quick change, I'll do it in the room so everybody can see it. And those types of things tend to be like things that I can do right then and there in the room. It tends to be very obvious when you play it whether or not it works. So it doesn't tend to be a lot of like, I make a change and then one person is vehemently for it and one person is vehemently against it. It tends to be like, oh yeah, that's better, or yeah, that's not so good. The rest of the time when I'm cutting in the room, at least the way that I like to cut, and the way that this thankfully sort of worked out, is that conversation leads to an action list of like, okay, these are what we think are the current problems with the film. Here is one way that we'd like to see if here's a list of solutions that we hope will work. Whether it's move this scene there, cut that out, try to like make this plot point more clear. Um, try to like pace up this section a little bit, whatever those notes are. That'll all be decided on during the conversation, then everybody will leave and I get to do that stuff on my own. And I prefer that, because when you are working on your own, I find you tend to discover more creative solutions to things than if you're simply going down a list while everybody is watching over your shoulder. When you're doing that, it's like it might work, it might not. It's like does the group think, is it effective? Does it like the chance that they've come upon the exact right answer during the group conversation is low, compared to like they might be circling the right answer, but if I'm left alone to figure out what actually works the best, and I don't have that time pressure of like people waiting and waiting for me to hit play, then I think the end result is better. So that I prefer, where it's like everybody talks, I hear the conversation, I understand what they're looking for, and then it becomes up to me as the as the editor and the creative person who is executing these notes to figure out what actually is the best like way to solve the problem, and tackle the note or the feeling that the group conversation left us with.
Well, talking about your editing process, Birds of Prey, John Wick 2 and 3 are very action-oriented movies, and we were wondering if there's a specific way that you like to approach editing action sequences, or if it's just like any other scene in terms of your process going forward.
I mean, so much of editing, whether it's action or dialogue or montages or whatever, is it's intuition, and it's your own personal timing. Like your internal clock is going, and so when you're watching a cut, some things feel right and they feel wrong, or a shot feels too short, or it feels too long, or it feels like there's too many shots in a row, or sometimes it feels like there's too many shots of the exact same length in a row. I mean, all these things they stick out to you, and probably to you alone initially. So, there are some constraints that cutting action adds because of the way that they have to shoot it. Action is shot in generally smaller chunks than dialogue. Um, so you aren't tiring out the actors doing, an insane amount of choreography in one take. That should be divided up into smaller sections that they can do more easily. Um, because if you're doing these super, super long takes and somebody screws up at the end, you've got to go back to the beginning. And I say that with full knowledge of John Wick is known for having these super long takes. But those are very, very meticulously designed to have cut points, so that the run of moves is not, you're not transitioning from, from one move to another in a way that is, that is uh, badly designed, or that is, is that going to have you contorting your body in some weird way. So there are still cut points designed in the action there. um, Whereas dialogue, you could have a 8-minute take of dialogue if the actors are, are really in it, and even if they screw up, then they just sort of reset and they keep going, without cutting camera. So at that point, it become, your edit choices become much more, um, much more infinite. In that, like, it's really up to you at that point to figure out what is the pace of the edit in, in a dialogue scene. um, I have thoughts about cutting action, and certainly preferences for what I think works and looks better and is more, um, is less visually confusing to an audience. But the other thing with action is that it is entirely dependent on, the talent and the preparation and the rehearsal and the execution and the cinematography and, like, all these things that go into getting those dailies. And so sometimes you don't have the choices that you wish you'd had if you are getting action that isn't shot well. And that's why you might end up with cuttier action than even you want if you have to fix mistakes. I'm very thankful that, on the Wick movies and on Birds of Prey, pretty much anything that, Chad has his hand in, you don't really get bad action footage, so that frees you to, to cut the scene in the way that you want to cut it rather than cutting it to hide a problem.
That's great. We were wondering how it is to work on a film without a finished script. As I understand it, John Wick 2 and 3's endings weren't fully set in stone. And so I was wondering if that sort of changes anything on the editing end, or if you're just sort of at the whim of whatever happens.
So John Wick 2's ending is as it was scripted and shot. The things that we reshot in John Wick 2 were for problems that came up. And those were sort of in the middle, sort of between the, like, Act 2 and Act 3 areas, and a little bit in the beginning. John Wick 3, it had an ending, and it didn't end up working as well as, as everybody had hoped, and then sort of as well as it read on the page. And so that one, it wasn't that we didn't have an ending so much as that we realized that we needed a different one. And there was a lot of discussion about what that different one should be. So we went back for just a 1-day reshoot, to get the Lawrence Fishburne scene. But I think the challenge of being an editor is just, it doesn't really matter what they wrote or what they intended, or what was planned. The only thing that matters is the dailies that you actually get, and what you can make with them. And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's challenging if they didn't make their day, like, that means that they didn't finish shooting everything that they wanted to shoot that day and they have to move on. You might not be able to make something out of it. And a couple of the things that we reshot in Wick 2 were because we didn't make our days a couple times in Italy, and that left me with, like, 3/4 of a fight scene. So, like, it's frustrating, but there's also, like, it's not it's not on me if the fight scene doesn't end because I don't have the footage. It just doesn't end, and we've got to, as a team, figure out a solution to that. um but yeah, I mean, it can be frustrating, uh if you don't get the material that you think or are hoping you're going to get. I also try not to Monday morning quarterback, because it's really hard to be a director and to be on set and to have all these things go wrong that you can't anticipate. There's always something that goes wrong, some location that falls through, or some noise problem you didn't anticipate because you scouted it on a weekend when there was no traffic, and then you shot on a Tuesday and all of a sudden it's rush hour. Those things, the practical world inserts itself into your best laid plans at every opportunity. And so you just sort of got to roll with it.
There's a quote by like Chris McQuarrie, which is that pre-production is the movie you want to make, production is the movie you think you're making, and post is the movie you actually made. So it's like the screenplay's never actually done being written. The edit is the third draft, essentially.
Yes, and we editors do, we do a lot of writing. We write, we write ADR lines for people. We're in those rooms as reshoots are being discussed as to, okay, what do we need to get ourselves from, we have a gap between A and D in the story. How do we, fill through, B and C? And so, it definitely flexes a lot of muscles, being an editor and being responsible for trying to come out of this process with something that feels cohesive and complete.
So we were looking at your IMDb, and we were just stunned by the amount of movies we like that you've worked on. And one of the notable ones I had a question on was you're credited as production support on Star Wars The Force Awakens. And we were just wondering what it was like to work on a Star Wars movie, because isn't that every kid's dream?
I think I worked on Force Awakens in probably the best way possible, which was just enough to have worked on it, to say that I worked on it, and to have seen the movie, multiple times before it released, but not enough where I got burned out or was hitting the end of the project being like, I never want to see this movie again. Which does happen after you've worked on a movie for a year. You're just like, the movie comes out and you're like, okay, well, I'll never watch that again. But so yeah, I working on that was definitely a dream come true, to be inside Bad Robot and to be helping them out. I worked for a week here and there to consult with their temp sound mixing process, as they were getting ready for screenings. And that was great. I don't know if you've seen, but there's a story I told on Twitter, I don't know, a month or two ago. And it was my first day coming into Bad Robot to work on Force Awakens. It was super busy at the time. The guy that hired me was the post-production executive at Bad Robot, Ben Rosenblatt. And so I come in and my job at that first week was all nights, because the building was so busy that the equipment that I needed was not available during the day. So they were like, come in the afternoon, you'll watch the movie to get up to speed on where we're at, and then by the time you're done watching the movie, then the day crew will have gone, and there'll be a computer available at night. So but it's so busy that there actually isn't a single Avid that's available for the entire duration of the movie. So I keep getting moved from room to room to room. And finally, I end up watching the last 45 minutes of the movie in Mary Jo Markey's room after she's gone home for the day. And I'm sitting there, and face is inches from the screen, as Han Solo and Kylo Ren are facing off on that bridge with the chasm beneath it. And I have sort of heard a door open a couple of minutes ago, but I didn't really pay any attention to it. And there's tons of people that come in and out, and some of my friends who are the assistant editors on that were came in and checked on how everything was going a couple of times. So I didn't really pay attention to it. And then Kylo kills Han, and Han falls off that bridge, and just like this fucking close to my ear, there's this voice that goes, "Wow, that's really fucked up." And I turn, and it's JJ. And JJ's been watching me watch his movie, for who knows how long, which was even more terrifying because he didn't know I was in the building. And even though I'd worked on a bunch of Bad Robot stuff at that point, I hadn't really ever worked one-on-one with him. So I was the guy that he knew that I was around, and I was a person he'd seen before, but we hadn't really talked, and here I am watching, and even within Bad Robot, the ending of Force Awakens was not something that was super widely known. And so like if you were going to talk about the movie at all, you had to do it inside of an office. You couldn't do it in the common areas, so here I was, like, some dude he doesn't know, for like hasn't seen working on this movie before, like in his editor's office watching the end of his top secret movie. And one of the things that is very endearing about JJ is, like, rather than like coming in and stopping me being like, why are you here, he was just like, he decided to to fuck with me instead. And it was terrifying and hilarious at the same time.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for telling it. Going off of the Star Wars train, sort of tangentially, you worked as an associate editor on Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which was edited by Paul Hirsch, who is a little editor who's worked on some indie films like Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, among many
Planes,
John
Trains,
Hughes
and Automobiles,
movies.
Carrie, Mission Impossible 1, yeah, you name it. Paul's working.
What was that experience like, and what was your role?
So associate editor is sort of it's a thank you credit. My actual title, my actual title was first assistant editor. Which is a big role, in editorial. But associate editor is a credit that you can give to a member of your assistant editor team, if they sort of go a little bit above and beyond. But it's not a union covered credit, unlike additional editor. In order to get credited as that, you have to be paid as an editor by the studio for a week. And so if you but there, as an assistant editor, sometimes like editors will throw you scenes to cut, and and you'll do some editing even though you are not actually, that's not your primary job responsibility. And so associate editor is a way to sort of recognize, like, you were the first assistant editor, but you also, helped out with some of the editing.
Contributed a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what that credit is about. But working with Paul is it's just it's like working for the like world's best editing teacher every day. And it's not even like Paul is like calling you in and saying, look at this thing and this is how I'm going to cut this. It's more just like you're watching it happen, and then if you can, I mean, you can ask him whatever you want, but like if you ask him what he's doing or why he did that, then you get into a deep conversation uh about his editing beliefs and his editing styles. And there's just no way to work with him and not pick up a lot of like very useful techniques and knowledge and perspectives. And you know, I was just amazed also at how fast he is, because he does have a very particular way that he likes his material prepped. And so the other assistants and I would spend, half a day or whatever getting the previous day's dailies prepped for him to cut. And then I was constantly running into the situation where I was not prepping it fast enough for how fast he could cut it. Which as an editor makes you sort of frustrated to, like, you hit when you are in a groove and you're cutting something and you're done and you're ready to like cut the next batch of dailies and it's not ready for you yet. It's a frustrating thing. So now being an editor, I see that. But yeah, he was. I learned a lot from him, that I definitely took into cutting John Wick movies and to running an editorial department. And his voice, some of his like Paul Hirschisms are in my head, just floating around there, at various moments.
So you worked as an animatic editor on Baby Driver and an assistant editor for Pan's Labyrinth, and we were just wondering about like what your job responsibilities were under these descriptions. Also, I love Baby Driver, so talk about that.
So Baby Driver, Baby Driver started with making a Rip-O-Matic. Do you guys know what that is?
Tell us.
It's called a Rip-O-Matic. And if you're a director and you're going into a studio meeting to pitch a movie that you want to direct and you want the studio to pay for, it's often helpful to go. Chad actually doesn't like doing this, but most directors do. It's helpful to go into the room with a video that's sort of cut like a trailer, for the movie that doesn't exist yet. And so in order to make that, you start ripping a bunch of other movies and movie scores and cutting them together into trailer form, finding, lines that are applicable from a bunch of other movies. And I've done this a few times before. I did it on Baby Driver, and they're usually like, 2 to 3 minutes, like normal trailer length. And maybe you've got, I don't know, 10 or 20 sources that you combine together. And Baby Driver, that's what Edgar said that he wanted. And his normal editors are UK based, and Edgar has a house here in LA, and that's where he was living and working out of at the time. So he wanted an LA editor that he could work with to make this thing. And we had a couple of friends in common who connected us, and I showed him the thing that I'd done, and he was like, "Okay, yeah, great. I want something a little bit different." I was like, "Yeah, fine, whatever." And he sends me this list, and it's like gargantuan. We ended up with at least 120 different sources, plus some like YouTube clips and like really obscure things that we had to go hunting down. And we created, in order to pitch Baby Driver, this mood reel, which essentially took all the songs that were written into the script and made sort of a rip-o-matic kind of for each one to try to convey the feeling of the movie while that song was going to be playing. So if it's like, if it's uh if it's part of the heist, then we play the song and we find a bunch of heist movies and sort of tell the story of a heist, or if it's like, if it's like Baby Falling in Love, then then we play like whatever the song was written in that part of the script. We'd like get 30 seconds of that or whatever, and find movies that had the feeling of that sort of like youthful love. And so we ended up cutting together like a 15-minute reel, which I think Edgar wanted because the concept of the movie was so tricky to describe that he needed as much as he could. Like he went in with not just the video that we made, but a bunch of other, a bunch of other materials that he had collected on his own and had other people create. But yeah, this video was designed so you could watch it and understand that the movie was going to be set to music entirely all the way through, and that these are the different emotions that he would be taking you through. And this is sort of how the syncopation of actions to the to the music would work. And so we did that, and it was like involved Edgar like coming over to my apartment, for a couple months. And then he pitched it a few different places. It finally got picked up at Sony. I cut it together a couple other reels for him, and then once the movie was greenlit, then he started storyboarding, and that's where the animatic editor title came in. So since it had been a fairly successful run up until that point, and his other editors were still in the UK and still, I think, busy on other movies, I cut together 90% of the storyboards for the film, and those were like, they storyboarded everything, even dialogue scenes were storyboarded. And the tricky thing became that I got John Wick 2. Like, this was a long multi-year process, and I got John Wick 2 somewhere in the middle of it. And so I went to New York to start cutting John Wick 2 while there were still storyboards flowing in for Baby Driver. And so there's like a couple of months where I was cutting dailies for John Wick at the office during the day, and then coming home and trying to bang out the next set of storyboards for Edgar at night, because I didn't want to, like, that was a scenario, going back to what you were asking earlier, where I was like, I'm not going to have another editor unless it's Paul Mackless. I'm not going to have another editor come in and take this over, until it's the editor of the film, because I knew that that I wasn't going to be editing the actual film Baby Driver. And so I did, I did all the storyboards and put sound effects and everything to them, and they went out to all the different department heads, so that the department heads and the people working on it could get an idea of what the movie was going to be about and how it was going to be shot and what was important to think about as they were doing their jobs. And then thankfully Paul called one day. I was like tearing my hair out because I desperately didn't want to let Edgar down, but I was also drowning in footage from John Wick. And so when the day that Paul called and was like, "Okay, I'm coming on the movie, send me everything you've got. I'll take it from here. And thanks for everything." I was like, "Oh, thank God." And so they were in Atlanta, and so I FedExed him my hard drive and my Avid project and everything that I'd ever done, for Edgar for that movie. And and then that was it. And then they invited me, to the premiere a couple years later when it came out.
What's the process of editing storyboards, as you were just describing?
So it's mostly like you're editing a flip book together.
Mm.
So it's in this case we had the song, and Edgar would send me the the storyboards and tell me the song to use, and then say a minute and 10 seconds into the song we have to be on storyboard number 50, and a minute and 40 seconds we have to be at storyboard number 230, and then in between that it was up to me to figure out how long each frame should last. How to give a sense of motion, how to get a sense of timing or of like tension or of a chase, or whatever the needs happen to be. But yeah, you're cutting a flip book and then adding sound effects and music underneath it, so that when you watch it, you can actually watch some of the storyboards that I cut on the Baby Driver DVD. They're in the extras. You're trying to give a sense of um, of timing, and of what angles are working and not working. An interesting exercise for me was watching the final film and realizing where I had been spot on in my timing and where I had been wildly off, or where there were things that came up during production that nobody had anticipated that needed, that necessitated a change, from the animatics that I had cut. And there was a good mixture. There's some sequences in the movie where I'm like, oh, this is like literally exactly the timing that I came up with in storyboards. And I'm still waiting to sit down and have a coffee with Paul for a couple hours where he can tell me, more in detail what was useful and what wasn't useful for him, as he was getting the live action footage. But then there were also, other sequences where I was like, oh, this is wildly different than we thought it would be. And again, those are the practicalities of production, and of trying to guess all of this stuff in advance, getting in the way.
Backtracking a little bit back to John Wick 2 and 3, I have to ask what it was like cutting together the pencil scene and the knife fight, and what that was like.
I mean, the knife fight is going to be on my demo reel for eternity.
As it should
As
be.
it should be.
I can watch the knife fight. Like, generally, I don't tend to watch the movies that I've edited after they come out in theaters. I'll see them opening weekend or with friends. And at some, like, sometimes they'll have like friends and family screenings where you can like get the cast and crew together sort of more privately than a premiere and watch it with a bunch of people that you care about. But after that, I don't tend to watch them again, because I them so intimately. There's no point in spending your time doing that, really, and no desire. But the knife fight is one where I'm like, I enjoy watching the knife fight. It's basically what you're seeing is almost exactly the first assembly. It just came together. There's the only section that we ended up um, changing a little bit was what we call the snowball fight, which is just when they're just chucking knives at each other, furiously, and you can't even really keep track of how many knives there are. That's actually a double action. So Keanu chucks his knives at them, and they chuck their knives at him, and then we switch to the reverse, behind their shoulder, and they do if you're looking, it's exactly the same choreography, but it's just repeated to extend the moment.
So did they just add like CG blades or something like that?
Yeah, most of the knives are computer generated. All of the glass that you see, all the glass that breaks, that's all CG. They, like, a couple times they'd have a knife handle that had no blade, and we would put a blade on it, like when he's stabbing the dude in the eye at the end. And there were there was one take where they did throw a rubber axe at Roger, who's the guy that takes the last axe to the head, which we didn't use. It was more of a reference for VFX as to like how an axe might fly, but they did hit him with it. It sort of like bounced on the floor and smacked into his face. Yeah, pretty much, everything that's sharp. If you're doing action like this, anything that's sharp is going to be CG.
You were credited working in the special effects department on Jurassic Park 3, and I love that movie, and I thought I would ask what that was all about.
So all of those like early credits are from my days at Stan Winston's. It's cheating a little bit, because when I started looking for assistant editor work, I had a resume that had all of these credits on it. But you get the credit just by being in the building when the company works on the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I didn't go to the Jurassic Park 3 set. I was just on the team at Stan Winston Studio, responsible for keeping the studio running while other people made the dinosaurs and puppeteered them and went to set to work on it. So yeah, it's certainly fun to be at Stan's when they're working on a Jurassic Park movie. And I think AI is one of the movies that sticks out most, as like the creativity that was on display as they were putting that movie, all the robots for that movie together. And I actually did get to like help do some soldering on that. That stands out, but I don't have like a Jurassic Park 3 story, because that credit is for attendance and not really for like work done.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about AI. You're credited as the Mecha Electronic Controller. Is that what you meant by the soldering?
Am I real? I actually forgot what I am credited as. Yeah, I guess that would be pretty close. I soldered some wires. I soldered some multicolor LEDs into the cheek skin of a robot that was one of two choices for Steven Spielberg to pick, and he chose the other one. So the work that I did was actually not seen in the movie. But actually, it was like my freshman year of college. I grabbed a buddy from my dorm, because it was one of those all hands on deck weekends at Stan Winston's, and they were like, "Do you know anybody who can solder? Bring him over." And so like they paid us, and well, I was already on the job, but they paid him, and and we spent a weekend twisting wires together and soldering LEDs into place. It was it was good.
That's awesome. One of the questions I just sort of spontaneously have is, are there any examples where you in editorial decided to make a choice that was completely different or kind of altering what was on the page, and like how that sort of would have come about, and if you have instances like that?
I mean that those happen all the time. They'll often happen. The ideas will happen during the assembly phase, but the execution of them can be delayed, because one of the things is that even if I know like I'm going to cut a scene, or the scene, if I know a scene needs to be cut, I still have to cut it together and show it to the director so that they can agree that the scene needs to be cut. And so these things are all, it's all a conversation and a collaboration. I would say that like on Wick 2, the like guns, suits, and maps montage was not a montage in the script. It was just a bunch of scenes of Keanu going to different places and having a full conversation, and then leaving that place and going to the next place and getting his suit, and leaving that place and going to the next place and getting his map. And it was 15 minutes of him walking around Rome, and it was one of the dullest things. And that was one of the things where like Chad and I hadn't really talked about it, but I knew that I was just deathly bored during that sequence, and there's just no way that could survive in that form. And so the like first week of the director's cut, I was like, I need like 3 days to work on something to show you, and just leave me alone during that time, and I'll call you when I've got something to present. And I mean, it was that was one of those things where when I presented it, I was like, okay, I know this wasn't in your plan at all, but I think we really need to like turn these 3 scenes into something much shorter. The minute he saw it, he's sort of like he'll sit down on the couch and he'll like think of all the different scenarios that I might not have thought of, and then ultimately come back, be like, no, okay, yeah, you're right, this is the way it needs to be. Proceed.
So we'll start wrapping up. We like to ask all of our guests how the coronavirus and the quarantine has affected your ability to work, and how quarantine has been treating you anyway.
Strangely, I actually started working on a movie right when LA went into lockdown, and I wrapped it 2 weeks ago. It's called Nobody. It's an action movie starring Bob Odenkirk.
Whoa.
And yeah, it was great. I jumped onto it again. It was like a movie that I came on partway through post. So I jumped onto it in early March, and I was able to cut from home almost the entire time up until we went to the final mix. And then when we needed to mix, we started mixing in early July. And then I did have to go to the Universal lot, every day for about 3 weeks. And there were 10 of us, including we were doing final mixing and color correction. So including the mixers and the colorist and the music editor and the director and everything, there were about 10 of us. And they tested us twice, just, as a precaution over the course of those 3 weeks. And, everybody wore a mask all the time, and, there's tons of hand sanitizer everywhere. And, so it felt as safe as it could be. There's risk in everything, and you're always aware of that. But, we came out of it. Okay, and nobody got sick during or after, the process that I know of. So, it turned out okay. And now I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. My 5-year-old is supposed to start kindergarten next week, but it's going to be all virtual. And now that I'm unemployed, I'm assuming I'm going to be helping, teach kindergarten. So, but yeah, for the most part, my days right now are keeping the kids busy. My mother-in-law takes them twice a week, which is how I'm able to have this uninterrupted interview. But the rest of the time is, going to the park and kicking a soccer ball around with them, or, trying to set them up with art projects and things like that.
That's great. Trent, you have any more questions you got, or?
No, I think that's it for me. You've been a wonderful guest. We really appreciate you coming on and giving us your time.
That was Evan Schiff, who worked on Birds of Prey, John Wick 2 and 3, among many other great films that you should all check out. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So that was our interview with the Birds of Prey, or the Fantabulous Emancipation of the One Harley Quinn editor, Evan Schiff. Thank you.
Well, co-editor. I don't want to take credit away from another talented editor, but
thank you, Evan Schiff, for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure. You were very nice. So, Parth, what comes next for this little program? Does this podcast continue much further, or is this the end for us?
I think we have a future. Next week, we're going to be discussing our own feelings on the film, and we shall reveal who our next guest is for the next 2 weeks. So make sure to catch our next episode.
Stay tuned, Foolios.
All right, well, that was a great interview. See you guys next week.